Welcome to our online webinar, How to Grow Your Business with a Virtual Team. My name is Sarah Haffenden and I'm the Marketing Communications Manager at UKZN Extended Learning. So we are the continuing education unit of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and we offer all the short courses on behalf of the university. So while we offer webinars, so we at UEL are in full support and compliance with the directive of a national lockdown issued to address the COVID-19 pandemic. So we are embracing the changes and are working on a number of projects aimed at providing free access to learning materials during the lockdown period. So one of these is the online learning webinars. So this webinar forms part of the Changing World Fourth Industrial Revolution series in our Learning Lockdown Initiative. And all of the previous webinars are available on our website in case you missed out on any. We have also launched the Labor Law series, which started last week and takes place on a Tuesday. So this Changing World 4IR webinar takes place on Thursdays. But do have a look at our final slide at the end of the webinar for further details, or visit our website, www.ukznextendedlearning.com. So I'd now like to introduce you to our guest speaker, Atul Padalkar. He is the founder of BizFarm, an unfunded business incubator and accelerator based in Durban since 2010. He is passionate about the fourth industrial revolution and teaches digital marketing at various universities. So over to you, Atul.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for this warm welcome and letting me into the UKZN UEL studio. It's 16th of April today. You know, we are now about 2 weeks to go before the lockdown is lifted, or I'm not sure whether it might get extended or whatever it is. But I wish you are all safe and you settle yourselves down with a cup of coffee or tea or something hot to drink, because that's also a way by which you could keep the COVID-19 virus out of your throat, which is where it generally seems to start. So this is a great opportunity for all of us to keep our learning going. And we can often say that the world after this situation is going to be not the same. So I'd like to kick off and start off with this presentation. Firstly, I would like to say a big thank you to UKZN UEL for having put this event together. And I would also like to say that whatever views expressed in this session for today are entirely of my own, and they are not necessarily of UKZN or UEL. So without further ado, friends, what might be good to get started off with is a very new way of learning for all of us. And maybe for those of us who may be new to getting used to webinars, I would like to start off by sharing some house rules as we see more and more participants coming in. So Zoom has pretty much become one of our preferred tools or useful tools in which we are using this as a way of channel of sharing the learning sessions which we are doing now. And we want to make it as open and as interactive as we can. And I'm sure you have questions and questions to ask for which you will see at the bottom window, which is a Q&A window. And you're more than welcome to ask your questions. We have an able and efficient technical team at the back who are collecting all these questions, and then we will try and answer all these questions towards the end. One of the common questions we often get during webinars like this is the recording and slides going to be available? And the simple answer for that is yes. So the only way is give us a little time after this webinar is finished. And what our technical team does is they download these videos, edit it a little bit, and then of course it's uploaded and you can access it from the UKZN UEL website. Now, please remember the UKZN website is different from the extended learning website. So just a small tip. We also, in our own way, are starting off with this initiatives. And to be very honest, I want to apologize upfront, because this is something which we are new about. And should we have any errors in this process, I want to say a very big sorry to you for that right ahead in advance. Obviously, we appreciate your thoughts and suggestions, and the Q&A window is a great place for sharing those thoughts. So without further ado, we would also like to make it very interactive, and we will have question and answers. There are some small polls which we have, and it's probably a good way to get started off by sharing a brief outline of what today's session is all about. As the title says, how does one grow your business with a virtual team? That's the question which we were tossing around when we had a discussion about how should this webinar go. And I think that's the question which we are putting up on the screen as you see now. What's always good to get a sense of is who is in the room, and we have a fast growing number of participants who are up there. So we thought we will kick off with a short survey, and it's an online survey, which means we will be able to share the results of this poll right away. I have Sarah at the background, and maybe this is a good time, Sarah, for us to put the first poll question up, which is to get a sense of who is in the room. So while Sarah is doing that, what I would request you to do is just click what is the most relevant description of yourself, or what describes you as best, whether you are a student, whether you are a UKZN staff member, or whether you are an entrepreneur or business owner, or whether you work for a corporate that includes government as well. No, well, government is also a separate question, and you could be more of all of that. For example, you could be a business owner and maybe even a student. We would love to have students, business owners. So we've got some very good quick responses coming in. We have, by the looks of things, about 9% students, 23% UKZN staff, 35% entrepreneurs and business owners, and roughly about 32% company employees. So thank you very much, those who have responded. Those who have not responded, I would still encourage you to keep responding, because it helps us to make this webinar directly relevant to your own needs. Now, just imagine if this was a traditional classroom. It would be such a difficult process to get, well, maybe show of hands would have been the one way of doing that. But with the Zoom, we are able to figure out exactly who is who in the room, and then we are able to, as we go along, tailor the webinar to the needs of what your interests might be. So thanks very much. I don't see almost anybody in government or parastatals being on this group, and we see largely UKZN staff, business owners, and company employees on this session, some students as well. So it's a very nice broad mix of everybody. We'll leave this poll for the next couple of minutes, next minute or so, and then we'll pull it away, so that if it's coming in the middle of your viewing of slides, it will not interrupt your viewing session. So I think if we look at this question, how does one grow this business? Then what we would need to look at is how does your business grow? But I think if you look at the statistics, and if you look at the economic outlook, one of the things that's pretty coming up there is we seem to be having a fairly bumpy ride in terms of the economy ahead. We've already had a fairly difficult time. We've seen that right at the beginning of the COVID-19 lockdown, we had a credit downgrade, and that obviously has a lot of implications. It means the cost of capital when we borrow from the international market goes up, because we are not seen as an investment destination. So that implication has other further cascading implications. The foreign exchange, the Rand, for example, has taken a little bit of beating. But I think the government has done, in my personal view, a very admirable job. They have dropped the repo rate not once, but twice, and not a little bit, but 100 basis points, which is 1% point, which is amazing. And I think the difficult times ahead of us basically are an indicator for us to say that, if you want to grow your business, the first thing that any one of us need to look at doing, whether it's a small business or whether it is even your own corporate, is survival. Survival is exactly what we all need to be aligned for. And some of the implications which economists say are likely to take place as a result of this lockdown is that there may be job losses probably. Already we are seeing a lot of industries, the hospitality, the restaurants, the hotel industry, many of these industries taking a lot of strain. And because this is a difficult situation and the revenues are not coming in like they're used to, it means that companies have very little option but to start reducing their overheads. They've got to tighten their belts, and unfortunately, one of the implication of doing that is also probably to see if they might need to release some of the staff or restructure their companies in whatever way possible. So I think this means a lot of things, and I'm a small business owner myself, and when we look at it from a business owner or even a company's perspective, we always ask, how do we achieve growth? How do we achieve and drive the growth? One of the limitations that often comes up for discussion is that we have bills to pay, we have overheads, and while today we are on the 16th of the month, we are slowly getting towards that day which almost every business owner gets butterflies in their stomach when we get close to the payday time. It's nice when you're an employee, you get the salary in your bank account on the 25th, which is fantastic. But when the tables are turned and when you become an employee, what you realize is that you've got to find the money to pay the salaries, and it's not a good situation if there's not enough money in the bank account for doing that. That's a situation which holds business owners from employing more staff. And this situation is what we want to avoid, which means how do we still get the benefit of the services of staff members in a way that it does not create the unnecessary pressure of developing a big fat payroll. And we often have told that our bureaucracy is slightly bigger than it should actually have been. Then the question becomes, how then can we adjust in the post COVID-19 scenario for adapting to the new world of work? So friends, we know that after COVID-19 and the lockdown is lifted, and my guess is that it won't get lifted just straight away. It just might get a little bit slowly relaxed and then progressively lead towards the life as usual as before. So that's my guess. But what it brings us back to is the learning that we have all gone through during these few weeks of lockdown. And that is the remote work is now getting mainstream now. And this means that working from home, which was pretty much of a luxury or an option, largely reserved for working mothers, mothers with babies, or people who were having issues at home, it was meant mainly from that point of view. So today, in the situation that we now are in, remote work has pretty much become mainstream. And I'm seeing more and more companies, more and more organizations taking work from home as a given thing. The focus is pretty much on making sure that you deliver the results that you need to deliver. And so long as you do that, it doesn't, I think, really matter which location physically is anyone based at. This obviously has many other implications. It kind of impacts our organizational culture. And this is typically what was already happening. And during the series on the fourth industrial revolution, we were actually reviewing how is the world of work going to change. So this is of implication for our students, because students need to understand that the traditional workplace which we believed, which is, let's say, an industry, for example, where you go to at work for, let's say, 7:30 in the morning and you stay there till 4:30 in the evening, that workplace has now become your own home. And this changes a lot of ways on how we actually work, because in a traditional workplace, you go there, you meet with your peers to catch up on what's happening around and what's happening within the organization and so forth. So that starts changing when remote work's becoming main place. If I were to give you an example of how remote work is becoming mainstream, the one example that comes to my mind is that of the Uber driver. So an Uber driver, for example, is not employed by Uber. And this is different from, let's say, any other taxi company who in most cases may employ their drivers or staff members. So traditional employment, which we saw as 9 to 5 and lifetime with a full salary for the whole month, that kind of work is getting restructured. And this restructuring of work is starting to take us into virtual teams. So virtual teams are basically where people are distributed, your team members are distributed. They may or may not be employees. They may not be necessarily on payroll. And therefore, a virtual team is starting to, by the nature of this change and shift in the work, is becoming mainstream. So virtual teams is likely to be, as they say, the future of work. In fact, many scholars have observed that the future worker or the future employee is most likely to be an entrepreneur. And that is an entrepreneur who's likely to offer new skills or new specific competencies. And therefore, the future of work is a very different workplace now. Even within corporates and governments, I think this COVID-19 has been a bit of a culture shock. Many of us initially thought that, hang on, this is like a holiday. But very soon, I think in the next uh, in about a couple of weeks after the lockdown was imposed, people started realizing that, hang on, we've still got to be earning a salary, and therefore we've still got to become relevant to the needs of the organization. Is there something that we can still go ahead and do while even if we are at home? And because we had a very small window of time to get ourselves prepared, and many of us ran and actually got groceries and stuff like that, some of course a bit more than necessary, but now we were not having enough time to get ourselves prepared to set up a proper home office, which means that you may not have had a laptop at home, for example. Musa, I note your hand. Musa Majola, noted. We will give you the opportunity to come back. So thanks very much for coming up. You're welcome, of course, Musa, to drop in your thoughts on the Q&A board. So remote work is starting to change. And in that sense, virtual teams are becoming mainplace. Now, it's not something new. It's not because of COVID-19. Virtual teams have already been there. And I go back to my own career. About a few years ago, I was working from South Africa, and a lot of people in the company that I used to work for were based overseas. For example, the manufacturing facility was based in India. The IP and the formulation of a new product which we were developing was coming in from Spain. The brand was being taken over from a Malaysian based subsidiary. And we were trying to put together a whole new product designed for the South African market. And this meant that we all had to work as a virtual new product team. And everybody was contributing. We did not have voice chats and Zoom and all of that, but a lot of that work happened on email. So virtual teams have always been there. It's now just that they are becoming mainstream. And this means the nature of our world, the benefits of understanding a virtual team are becoming far much more obvious enough to us. And one of them is that, you know, in a team, the reason why a team is set up in the first place is because a team brings together multiple sets of skills to get some work done. And I would probably say a webinar like this webinar has been made possible because A, we've got a marketing team working at the back, we've got a technical team working at the back, we have the management team giving us the guidance and direction at the back. And between all of these different skill sets, everybody with a different role, each one is bringing something new, something unique into making an event like this happening. And I think a lot of these traditional events, which we've seen taking place in convention centers and so forth, are all starting to get progressively moved into the virtual space. So a virtual team allows you to access a lot of different skill sets, and you can get those skills from anywhere in the world. So these are probably opportunities where you can hire the best specific skill set from anywhere in the world. And when we move into the world as a source of our skills, what it opens up is multiple time zones. For example, your developer could be sitting in New Zealand, your market could be in the US, you could be actually producing the product or solution in South Africa. So this changes a lot of things. And arising from that, what it leads us to is putting a team with a very specific and a different mandate for itself. The other good thing about teams, if we look at it from a business person's point of view, is that you only pay for the work that gets done. You do not have to hire a full employee. And that is also one of the things for corporates to think about is, do we really need this entire person, or do we need the access to the specific skills which we have? Now, this might of course raise the fear that, hang on, are we then going to job losses? But here's the thing, that skill set right now is useful to only one company. And as employees go, that skill is then only available to that one company which is employing that person. But many other companies are also looking for that same skill set, which means that this same skill set, let's assume for a moment that let me make it a simple example as a graphic designer. So one single company may not have enough work for, let's say, one graphic designer, but that graphic designer's skills may also be used by some other companies as well. So in that sense, it becomes a very specific output that the graphic designer is expected, which could be a design, a poster, or something of that sort. And in that sense, that skill becomes now easily available to many other companies as well, which means defining a whole new work culture, setting up your own routines for the company. Because there's no traditional 9 to 5, it doesn't really matter when you come to work, when you go away from work, when you take your lunch break, when you take your tea break, and so forth. That doesn't really matter. So it sets up a completely new team culture. It also means that in many companies, for example, in my own business, I have started having a 10 o'clock kind of a huddle, and sometimes we try and do it a little bit later because we have many females who have other things to do apart from work at their own houses. So we are sensitive to that, and we start a late morning session for the day. So that gives you flexibility, and it means offering flexible time, flexible client base, and so forth. So this is probably your ideal life. If you're on the side of being that virtual team person, then that's great for you. So this is not the first time this is being discussed. This has been discussed, and initially this discussion was brought up by Tim Ferriss. And Tim Ferriss, who's the author of the 4-Hour Work Week, he put the thought that you don't really need to work 9 to 5 uh, and 24/7 kind of a job. You just need to define what your work is. You need to eliminate what you don't need to do yourself. In other words, you can delegate it to somebody else. And then you can automate as much as possible part of your work. So if that is possible to be done, then automation starts becoming pretty central to reducing your time of work. And in an ideal world, if I had my way, for example, I would say if I can make money while I can sleep, that would be great for me. And that I wouldn't say sleep necessarily, but I would like to pursue something else. And many of us work because we have to work. We are required by necessity to work. This changes the game now. And if you are able to define the business processes within our companies, then we are able to see how we can start off this process of developing a virtual team by firstly doing a business process mapping, which means, for example, uh, if I were to take the example of education, for instance, it would be the first process where we set out the marketing material of what courses are offered. We do the onboarding and recruitment of students. The accounts team works with them to process their payments, and then passes them after that is done to the project team. The project team brings on board the necessary faculty, puts together the venue, puts together the students, gives them the learning materials and everything else, and off we go into the learning program, which then starts off with assignments, which starts thereafter with some group work, some team tasks, and goes further on to assessments, exam time, project work time, eventually leading to graduation and certification and so forth. So that in a very simple way is the whole process map of typically how educational process would do. Obviously, once we are able to map this process, the question then comes back is to how do we then break up these processes, and how do we let specific processes be managed by specific teams, which means we need to start looking at putting the virtual team together. So how do we hire the team? And to a large extent, I think virtual teams are best hired virtually because of the nature of work. It's not practical sometimes to fly people down or bring them down and have a face-to-face interview. It's not necessary, thanks to the blessings of the technologies that we have. And then, of course, new criteria for selection start coming on board. For example, one of the first few questions which often companies would ask for is, are you able to work from home? Are you open to flexi time working? Do you have a home office in place? Do you have necessary connectivity in place? All of these things start becoming quite important apart from the traditional criteria for selection. This also has implications on the contract of work with every employee, and then starts the process of allocating specific work to everyone, agreeing what they will deliver, when they will deliver, who will be the supervisor, how does quality assurance take place, and how will not a traditional salary but compensation be provided. So that starts becoming the traditional gig economy, as we may call it, and the nature of work is then shifting for each one becoming an e-lancer, which is pretty much the freelancer kind of a module. This, of course, if you are on the other side, starts changing how your team routines change. You need to then start allocating your time. What we would normally allocate for a face-to-face meeting would then start becoming a team huddle in the morning or whatever times are. And because it's a global kind of a team in place, we probably have to be sensitive in many cases to people's time zones and so forth. So to enable a virtual team, and here's the thing, what a virtual team does for a business is it allows you to scale up. It allows you the freedom of scaling up dramatically without having the burden of overheads. If I were to point out one single benefit of a virtual team, I think that benefit is pretty much about virtualization and scalability. So scalability is fantastic. It gives you the ability to grow faster than ever before, and therefore that changes the rules of the game. It reduces your overheads, and it doesn't necessarily reduce your salary bill, by the way, because you're still paying, but that is very directly related to how people deliver, to how transparent the organization is, and so forth. So that doesn't happen easily, by the way. That means changing the way we do work, and that also means getting to use a lot of different tools and learning pretty much different things. A lot of this stuff is not taught to us in school, let alone universities. So this is something I think we will all have to step up our learning game and learn out of the box, figure out how we get those new skills completely, and understand how, for example, how Zoom works, how can data be shared, how can quizzes be done, for instance, as we've just done now, and so forth. So becoming a virtual worker has its own benefits. It also has its pluses and minuses. So there are two sides to the coin as ever. And I would like to then start looking at, if you were to, for argument's sake, start looking at becoming a virtual worker, then how does one do that? How does one, if you're employed in a company, renegotiate the nature of terms of your work with your superiors and see how you could still get the benefit of what you've just tasted in the last few weeks to become something more central to the way of how you work. So I think the first step to doing that is to set up a good home office. And this means getting the necessary equipment, which could be a good functioning laptop, a good printer, and very good connectivity. I think connectivity is something which is very, very essential. A good signal is very critical. So once that happens, that would be great, because in many instances, we see that the access to internet is often only at the workplace. The access to internet from home is not always everybody's priority, and I think that needs to shift, because a lot of family members, for example, may now need to start looking at working from home. Family members will also mean that we need to make arrangements with the families, and in every family, for example, there are people who love to start their day early, like me, for example, or people who are late night owls, like my daughter, for instance. So we've got to manage our work tasks and make arrangements with the family. If you are a virtual worker, how the tasks get divided, and that could, in this instance, also be the similar arrangement with your other teammates. Now, the main reason why anybody is in business of being a virtual worker is pretty much going to be based on skills. So I think there is no choice but for somebody who wants to become a virtual worker to have some really top-notch expertise, which means you've got to be very good at something at least. You've got to be exceptional in a way that you're able to put out your skills, and somebody out there is looking for those kinds of skill sets. In other words, because in a traditional employment, once you've got a job, you are done, you're sorted. Whereas in a virtual worker's case, you have to keep looking for work all the time. And to do that, marketing itself becomes a very important business process for you as a virtual worker. And to do that, you've got to figure out how these different tools, which are enablers of a virtual worker, are actually used. And I'm going to share some examples and some specific areas of skills where it might be a good idea for you to develop your own skills, and one of the important central skills to that is perhaps getting to understand how video conferencing works. We might be seeing already it's started happening. A lot of politicians, because of the work from home policy, are now required to even hold press conferences from the comfort of their own homes. So understanding different video conferencing platforms is one of the important requirements for all of us. And becoming familiar with the different team sharing tools like Slack, for example, like Dropbox, for example, where teams are able to correspond, teams are able to share data, are some of the new areas where all of us will now need to start developing expertise. This does not come in the traditional curriculum of a university. This is not part of how a company really works. But you know what? The rules of the game have changed so quickly that if we have to stay relevant, we will all have to start learning these new skills pretty quickly. In fact, we've been joking around and saying, why don't we actually put together a virtual team worker course so that we are able to structure this in a very proper way? But maybe you can share that with us when we get back to our Q&A part of it. So team and virtual working is great. It opens up opportunities for growth. It's in its own way has its own blessings. But let's have a quick look at the other pluses and minuses, the pros and cons of what actually a virtual team brings to us. So we are traditionally used to the face-to-face meeting. We know that we have to go and travel to a meeting. Now, if we work as a virtual team, we don't really have to do all that, which means that your commuting is now telecommuting. You don't have to go to work, sit in traffic jams, especially if you're sitting in a very busy city like Johannesburg, for example. You don't need to start at 7:30 and then from 7:30 to 8 kind of go through the whole traffic, get stressed and come all haphazard at work. No need anymore. You could easily go maybe a little bit later when the traffic is cooled down a bit. And that changes the way for how you can work in a virtual team, which is great about it. Now, how the culture of a team is set is very important. I touched upon that earlier. And I think in the pros and cons of putting a good virtual team together, there are, I would say, three critical things one needs to take into account. The first is you need to understand what is the nature or what is the interest of each team member. Remember, people are on a team because of what they found as interesting to be on the team for. So one has to take into account, firstly, the interests of the team. The second thing to bear in mind is transparency and data. The good part of data is it creates transparency. What it creates is an absolutely open meritocracy. It does not now really talk about who you are or what you are, but it talks a lot much more about what you bring to the success of this team to happen. So that transparency is also very useful when we are able to correlate what you put in and what you get out. So if that's shared openly and transparently, or at least the workflow, for example, or the task description, or who's slacking and who's not, who's pulling the team down, and if that's pretty open, then specific support could be offered in that case. The third part is the competence. So all team members are there because they bring in specific skills, and you've got to prove that you are worthy of a place in that team. So the virtual team is mainly going to be successful simply because somebody who comes into that team brings something really specific, unique, and exceptional to doing that. It of course brings a lot of self-discipline, and when I say competence, it also includes discipline, self-discipline, value for money. These things start becoming important. I spoke a little earlier about the Uber example. So how courteous an Uber driver is going to determine how much future work he's going to take, because he's going to get, because once you finish the Uber ride, you are able to rate your driver. And I think in a virtual team environment, if you've delivered the work well, somebody is obviously going to rate you very well and recommend you highly, which will bring more work for you. And obviously, unfortunately, if you've messed up and not delivered, the reverse may equally also be true. So this was just a very quick glimpse to introduce all of us to how a virtual team could be used effectively enough even in a restructured economy that we are going to expect to see in the post-COVID-19 scenario. So this is not really the whole course. It's just briefly, I would say, an introduction to see how a virtual team can become a way for you to grow your business, a way for you to build your team, a way for you to build your company, your corporate. And I think it's also perhaps a great way for building service delivery skills within maybe even the government, for argument's sake. So we are not fighting the change, the tide of change. We have to only see that when the tide is taking its course, how do we align ourselves? There's no point in fighting it, but there's only one way in which how we can align ourselves to it. So this is the beginning of the first few webinars. We've already had a couple of webinars as we start wrapping up. And I'd like to say that this is a initiative which we are looking at in seeing how we could develop this further ahead. I would like to share very quickly some of the upcoming webinars which are ahead of us. So this is a whole schedule, and you will see the schedule also on the website of University Extended Learning. You can accordingly plan your availability, and we are, as you can see, going even beyond the lockdown time. So just in case if the lockdown is either stretched or relaxed or whatever it comes from, we don't know, this initiative will still be able to go on. Obviously, a lot of you who may be coming from corporates or even from university environment might now be wondering is where to from here. And I think the simple answer to that is probably a good way of sharing the contact details of our UKZN Extended Learning sales team. We have Cindy and we have Vinosha. Sorry, Sindiswa. I'm calling you again by our normal informal kind of way. But so we have Sindiswa and we have Vinosha. And we know that you may not be able to contact them on the normal office number, so we are sharing with you their cell numbers. So it's a good opportunity for picking up the phone and seeing in what way can UKZN Extended Learning be of help. And if you have any feedback, we would really appreciate that. And I think with that, I'll probably hand you over to Sarah. We have some other polls and some other questions also coming up shortly. I'll have a quick jump into the Q&A windows, and I'm sure by now your mind is thinking in terms of comments. I'm going to share some of the comments going here. And for example, we have Lungelo. Lungelo, if you don't mind, and folks, participants, if you don't mind, I'm going to acknowledge your comments as well. So Lungelo Ngwane, his comment is, the advantage of the traditional office-based work is that as a business owner, you're able to pool all your resources together. He goes on to say, as a small business owner, would a virtual team not have a negative impact on the overheads from that perspective? So it's a very good question, I might say. And, having, as we've probably gone further, this question came in just towards the end at 10:34. So Lungelo, I agree with you, having a virtual team has its own pluses and minuses. Sometimes it's good and necessary to bring the whole team together under one roof. That's why organizations host conferences and meetings. Obviously, in this situation, we are limited by the fact that we cannot get out of home. So right now, we have no option but to work in a virtual team. But I think when situation gets back to normal, once we know that the lockdown is over, we can start going about our business, probably not in the same way as before, but slightly in a more controlled way. I think it's a good blend to have a virtual team and a face-to-face or a residential team. It just depends on when you understand the mix of both. A good blended formula, which works best for your own business, is perhaps the best solution to come. And that's my personal view. You have to figure out, sometimes maybe through some practical experience and some trial and error if it takes, you can decide what works best for you. I hope that answers your question. I'm looking for any other questions if we have any. If not, Sarah, if she's around, we can start looking at getting our poll together. I can see a few more questions which have come back. Amanda at 10:41 asked the question, will it be possible for courses on available open sources and free apps to be considered by UKZN Extended Learning? I'm going to pass this question to the UKZN Extended Learning team to answer. Musa Majola, yes, thanks for putting up your hand earlier, and now thanks for putting your question is, what is the level of digital literacy or the type of digital skills needed? So Musa, I think the future is digital. We all have a fairly good indication of that. You're right in the follow-up question as well by saying that in South Africa we have an existing digital divide, and I absolutely agree with you. We have a huge digital divide right now. Data is the enabler of economic enablement, in my personal view. And we have to really address this question of digital divide in at least two or three different dimensions. The first is an affordable access to data. We've recently seen a drop in the prices of data, but I don't think that has really taken us close enough to what many other countries have if you compare the cost per gig as as one factor to consider about. So that's one thing to bear in mind. The second is the necessary equipment, and I think the prices of laptops have become fairly affordable. They're also easily affordable in terms of having a rent to buy kind of option and so forth. So some of the things that one needs to look at is definitely having access to a laptop or some kind of a tablet if need be. Tablets have also come down to around 1,000 rand price point, so that's possible. uh, yes, one needs to get organized for that. Uh, Musa, if I may say, the one thing that is definitely in your control is developing the skills. And I think I respond that to in line with Amanda's query, that yes, there are a lot of open source courses which have suddenly been made available, and there's quite a list of these kinds of public domain courses. uh, there is Coursera, for example. There are Udemy and many other similar things, and the good old YouTube, for example. So, knowledge is for free if you look at it from any point of view. Knowledge is for free. Important thing is to make that knowledge practical and relevant to the needs of yourself, your organization, your institution, and see how it goes further. We have Fundo online. Many happy returns belated in Fundo, if you're the one I think you are. Your question relates to open source softwares in general, but maybe to use Moodle as an example. Absolutely. How complex or suitable is Moodle as an educational platform if you want to offer online classes and compare it to Google Classroom if possible? Well, that's an interesting question. And Mfundo, you see, what platform you choose in the digital space is actually now starting to become a more and more complex question. And very often organizations refer to it as what is called the digital stack. So the digital stack is pretty much the choice of what technology options do you prefer to use on the basis of what is it that works for you. For example, I mean, one could go for a very high-end Polymax kind of a video conferencing if you are a corporate. But if you're happy with something that works and it's quite basic and simple as that, then you have simpler solutions. Now, another thing to bear in mind, a lot of these solutions at a base level come for free, but they're not free forever and not free without any conditions. Zoom, for argument's sake, it's free for up to 40 minutes, but it has limitations that after 40 minutes you've got to upgrade. You can also have only 100 people, for example, on Zoom at a point in time. So, Fundo, to answer your question, what platform you choose depends on the nature of your course, depends on the nature of who you're trying to deliver it to. And my guess, personally speaking, is whether these are by themselves enough. And the debate is all education possible to be delivered online? And my personal answer is that maybe not 100% and not as of now. Probably a good blend is what works best. Amanda's got a follow-up question, and Amanda is asking, how will it be possible for courses on to be available on open sources and free apps to be considered by UKZN extended learning? Amanda, I have a feeling we've already had a look at this question when I said that this will be best answered by my colleagues from extended learning. Sarah's going to come back a little bit when she starts closing. And in the previous webinars, what we've done is, when for the, let's say, lack of time, or when for the lack of not being able to answer some questions instantly, what we do is we respond we respond to these questions via email directly to the person who asked these questions. So what we've done is, as we start going through each one of these questions, I think we've addressed Fundo's query. We've also addressed Amanda's query, and Amanda's query is going to be addressed by the rest of the team. I'll be honest in saying, as I said earlier, that I might not be able to answer all questions. I will certainly do my best to answer the technical related questions as far as virtual teams are concerned. I would like to ask you is, and you'll see that also in the Q&A, is that what would you see for yourself as the next way of learning, as the next way of improving your skill sets? Because I think the objective for us in a broader way is to really see how can we be of help to you, how can we be able to empower you, how can we make you become more employable if you're a student, or if you're a university faculty member. How could we now get back to seeing how can we make our jobs more fruitful and effective by adapting to the new way of learning in virtual teams. And virtual teams could be the faculty teams, as well as virtual teams would probably be uh, student teams as well. Yes, Musa's come back by saying you've been using platforms like IBM Digital Nation. Yes, DNA, Digital Nation Africa, and many organizations. IBM, for example, as you rightly pointed out, has Digital Nations Africa. Microsoft also has its own specific solutions in that space. Google, Oracle, as you rightly said, Musa. Almost every corporate who's in this space, and I don't want to continue naming any one of them more for any reason, but almost every ICT company, out of either their social responsibility or as a function of market development, are putting these kinds of solutions to bring on board new customers into this space. So I hope as we start wrapping up for the last next couple of questions or so, it's been an interesting opportunity for being with you this morning. I really hope and pray that you stay safe, you keep your social distancing rules, keep yourselves happy, and hang in there. Use this time profitably and valuably. I want to say a very big thank you to Simon Tankard, the CEO of UKZN Extended Learning, for driving this initiative, and then for Nashleen Maharaj, who's the marketing manager, to giving it the actual effect of making it really translate from a concept into reality. Then, of course, at the team at the back, we've got Sujay, the technical team, and my co-host presenter, Sarah, without whom this would not have been possible. Folks, I must admit in saying that we all had to experiment and trial a lot before we got to this point. So I'm really very grateful to all my colleagues around there. So Vinosha and Cindy are, of course, your first point of call if you really want to take this conversation further. So with those few words, I want to say a very big thank you to you, and I want to hand you back over to Sarah. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Atul. Thank you for your insightful presentation today. If you could just put it back onto the slide with the upcoming webinars, just so that everyone is aware of our upcoming webinars. At the same time, I'm also going to launch the poll where you can rate how useful the session was. So if you could also just rate that. But yeah, but basically, thank you, Atul. And we do look forward to your upcoming webinars. There's two more scheduled for the month of April. So as you have heard, the videos and the slides will be available on our website. So we'll be sending out the link to this as soon as it's ready. I'd also like to thank all of you, our attendees, for joining us and obviously making this webinar a success.
We are almost closing off, and then I would like to say that we were not able to complete our survey, but nevertheless, I want to say a big thank you for being here, and wish you a very happy and safe day ahead. Stay safe, stay at home, use your time well. And I just want to say a big thank you to everybody for being on this program, and look forward to seeing you on the future programs. And yeah, thank you so much.